Well, hello, dear comrades, and welcome to this new series of close readings of another philosophical book. After spending 16 weeks reading Slow Down, the Degrowth Manifesto by Kohei Saito, which is a book that delves into Marxist ecological thought and communism from an ecological perspective, this time we are going to spend a few weeks reading a book about the philosophy of religion, and it is called Naturalism and Religion, a contemporary philosophical investigation by the Australian philosopher Graham Oppy, published in 2018. So I need to say something first. Do not confuse this book with another one that is very influential but has exactly the same title, like Naturalism and Religion. But this other book was published in 2001, and it was written by an American philosopher, Kai Nilsson. But I also recommend Nilsson's book because it's a great read, and it's a good recommendation as a further reading. And Oppy also mentions the book in the introduction, which we are going to be reading today, and he also mentions it in the bibliography. Just don't confuse the two, but yeah, I mean, it's a good reading if you want to know more about naturalism. Anyways, Oppy's book is published by Routledge in their series Investigating Philosophy of Religion. It's a series that has 6 books to date, published between 2016 and 2019, and apparently it stopped in 2019. I don't know why. In Naturalism and Religion, you only have 4 books mentioned, because it's the 4th book in the series, published in 2018. The first one was on Judaism, then you had on Buddhism, then Islam, and Oppy's book came just after. Then you had a book on Hinduism, and lastly on Taoism. So no book on Christianity, which is the biggest religion in the world in terms of believers, or on Shintoism, on Sikhism, or Jainism, or African religions like Voodoo, because many ignore this, but Voodoo is a big world religion with 60 million believers. So it would have been interesting to see the series cover all of these religions. So the point of the series is to, quote, philosophically engage with the major world religions in light of central issues they are currently facing. So that's why each book is also subtitled A Contemporary Philosophical Investigation. So each work isn't just a summary of the history, practices, and beliefs of each religion, but to address contemporary issues that each religion faces. So it also needs to incorporate the latest developments in scholarship in the field. So it's basically an up-to-date work written by a leading scholar in that religion. So it's written for obviously academic purposes, for students and scholars, but it's also for anyone who wants a detailed but concise overview of the central issues regarding world religions. Now, you may have noticed that Oppy's book stands out compared to the others because it has a peculiar title. The others have just the religion's name as a title, but Oppy's book is Naturalism and Religion, which sets it apart from the others. Like if he titled it Naturalism, like Islam, Buddhism, or Taoism, perhaps it would suggest that naturalism is a world religion like any other religion. But here's the thing. Naturalism is not a religion, at least according to Oppy, and he's going to insist on this. But this doesn't mean that naturalists don't believe in anything, like they don't have beliefs. Everyone has beliefs, of course, but just having beliefs, doesn't mean that you are religious or have a religion. But you can ask, what are the beliefs of naturalists? What do naturalists believe in? Well, Oppy lists the core beliefs of naturalism in a book called 50 Voices of Disbelief, Why We Are Atheists. So this one was edited by Russell Blackford and Udo Schuklenk. Not sure of the pronunciation. I'm sorry for butchering the name here. So it's a book that compiles 50 texts by atheists giving account of their belief or disbelief in God and their reasons for it. And Oppy is one of them, and his piece is called What I Believe. And he sets to enumerate the core beliefs of his naturalism. So what do naturalists believe in? Well, according to Oppy, there are 20 beliefs to have in order to be called a naturalist. So these are beliefs about causality, about the constitution of reality and its implication for the quality of life, of truth, of consciousness and subjectivity, and then about attitude towards those who don't, share these beliefs. So first, the first belief is a naturalist believes that causation is impossible without the physical transfer of conserved quantities like energy or momentum. Like in any genuinely possible world, causing something always involves moving some conserved physical stuff. Second, anything that can cause or be affected by something else must be entirely physical in nature, and there is no genuinely possible world in which non-physical things enter into causal relationships. Third, where there is causal relationship, there is also spatial-temporal relationship. Anything that can cause or be affected by something must have a definite location within a space and time-like framework, and there is no genuinely possible world where causal things lack such a determinate location. 4. The universe is entirely made up of physical objects and events arranged in a network of relationships like space and time, and there is no possible world where the universe is fundamentally anything else. 5. If the universe is entirely made up of physical objects, well, what about abstract objects like, for example, numbers? Well, whether a possible world includes only the physical domain or also the domain of abstract entities like numbers, that depends on your philosophical view. Like if you are a nominalist, for example, you would deny that there are such things as abstract objects. But for understanding the naturalist framework, this choice doesn't really matter because naturalism isn't really affected if there are abstract objects. Well, we are just going to consider them natural entities as well. 6. Belief. If our universe follows the laws of physics, especially relativity, then no being inside it could be all-powerful and all-knowing, so there is no entity running the universe, since that running would have to go against physical laws. It's either physical laws or a supreme being that runs it, but you cannot have both. 7th belief, even though the universe is entirely physical, we cannot yet be sure whether it is deterministic due to quantum mechanics, but we cannot infer anything with certainty, at least at the present moment. 8th, even though our universe is completely physical and any exact physical copy of it would be exactly the same in every way, this doesn't mean that everything about the world can be described in terms of physics only. Other fields like biology, psychology, or economics can still tell us important truths that physics alone cannot fully capture. 9. All mental states, including consciousness, are entirely physical, so a world identical to ours couldn't exist with zombie human beings lacking consciousness, though different creatures could have conscious states with different physical makeups. 10. Current science provides no evidence against the idea that all mental states and human agency are fully physical. So accepting a completely physical universe doesn't conflict with our understanding of consciousness, freedom, or human behavior. 11. Because a universe is defined as the totality of all causally connected entities, it is impossible for a universe to have a cause for its existence, though this doesn't rule out causes of the initial singularity from which the local space-time in which we are embedded arose. 12. It is natural and acceptable that the universe has no cause, because every consistent explanation must eventually end with basic brute facts that simply exist without further explanation. 13. The universe is entirely physical and not created with any mind or purpose, so it is not intelligently designed, and while biology and other sciences can study apparent purposes or design, these do not imply any fundamental intentionality in the universe itself. 14. There is no cosmic meaning or purpose behind the universe itself, but this doesn't prevent people from creating and living meaningful lives through their activities and relationships. 15. Even in a completely physical universe, moral and aesthetic values can still exist and remain meaningful, and philosophical debates about their nature doesn't prevent their legitimacy. 16. Even in a completely physical universe, moral and political norms, like rights and obligations, can still exist and be meaningful, even though philosophical debates about their nature are occurring. This too doesn't negate their legitimacy. 17. Even in a fully physical universe, there can still be meaningful answers to how to live, to how to best live, and we can learn from the traditions and insights of others to guide our own decisions and judgments. 18. Beliefs in supernatural entities or events can be fully explained as products of human experience, culture, and psychology without assuming that anything supernatural actually exists. 19. Human reasoning is very fallible, so even though naturalists believe it is true and well justified that every possible universe is entirely physical, they don't claim that doubting this view is irrational or that the view itself is certain. And lastly, 20. Acknowledging that naturalism relies on controversial assumptions and they are not presented as a definitive argument, but rather as an outline of a fully physical worldview that can be consistently developed and competes with supernatural-based worldviews. So these are the 20 beliefs of a naturalist. Now, does any of these beliefs make naturalism a religion? Well, we will see through Oppy's book that it doesn't, and that naturalism and religion are actually two mutually exclusive terms. The whole point of the book, one of the main points of the book, is to demonstrate that naturalism is not a religion, and more precisely, it's to present a worldview of religion from a naturalist perspective. In other words, how naturalists look at religion. So from the first page, that is a presentation of the book, we read that this book is an investigation of religion from a naturalistic perspective, and the book explores the very meaning of the term religious naturalism. Now we will go back to that term, religious naturalism, in the 4th chapter, because if we agree that naturalism isn't a religion, well, it is difficult to conceive of a religious naturalism or a naturalistic religion. Now that would be an oxymoron, but that will be the focus of chapter 4. Basically, Oppy takes some widely disputed claims and is going to explore them, claims like that one, that there cannot be a naturalistic religion, but also that there is nothing in science that poses any problems for naturalism, that there is nothing in religion that poses any serious challenges to naturalism, and that there is a very strong case for thinking that naturalism defeats religion. So these are the main points, or the 4 main points that Oppy is going to defend through the book. The most important one is that last one, that naturalism not only is not a religion, but it also defeats religion. Now, don't worry, no one is going to take away your deities or places of worship. Defeating religion simply means that naturalism offers a better explanation for the natural world, which also includes the social world, than religious accounts. Or more precisely, it doesn't explain it any less better than religion, but does so with fewer costs. We will explain what that means by better, or as well explaining with fewer costs, in due time. So point 1, 3, and 4 seem to be coherent. Since naturalism isn't a religion, there cannot be a naturalistic religion or a religious naturalism. So the two notions logically, exclude one another, and so this Oppy will try to demonstrate through the book. But since they are antagonistic, does that mean that they pose challenge to each other? Well, according to Oppy, and this is again something that we will see how he argues for it, according to him, only naturalism poses challenges to religion, but religion doesn't pose any challenge to naturalism. By this he means that the challenges posed by religion to naturalism are easily overcome by naturalism. Religion cannot answer to the challenges that naturalism poses to it, whereas naturalism answers to all challenges religions pose to naturalism. So this is also what we mean by naturalism defeats religion. So this is for point 1, 3, and 4. But what about the second point? That one seems odd, right? Does science pose any problems to naturalism? Well, Oppy says no, but that doesn't mean that naturalism defeats science like it does with religion. There are in fact no challenges between science and naturalism, since according to naturalism, science is its very foundation. Naturalism simply says that there are no phenomena in the world other than natural ones, and since science only deals with natural phenomena, then science cannot pose problems to naturalism. It can only pose a problem in two ways. You either want to include non-natural things as also the object of science, which is, what religious people do when they want to pretend that their beliefs are also supported by science. Or you claim that just because science deals with only natural things, it doesn't mean that there are only natural things, which is what naturalism claims. So here you can say naturalism claims that there are no non-natural entities, only natural ones, but science deals with only natural entities but doesn't claim that there are no non-natural entities, and therefore naturalism is at odds with science. So we will explore these arguments as we go through the book. So to sum up, this book is about religion from a naturalistic perspective. But what does naturalism have to say about religion? And also it's about the opposite too. It will also explore what religion thinks of naturalism. So the claims of naturalism from a religious and philosophical perspective, these will also be explored. So the book is also an ideal introduction for undergraduate and postgraduate students of religious studies and philosophy. So if you are interested in philosophical questions about religion in general and are curious about its most potent critique, well, this book is for you. I really take it that Oppy is perhaps the best critic of religion that we have today. Naturalism, Oppy is obviously a naturalist, is a critique of religion. And we will obviously explain what naturalism is in greater detail and how it defeats religion. But also the book will debunk a few myths about naturalism, myths and misconceptions that are often spread by religious people. They are more straw man than misconceptions. The idea that naturalism is also a religion, for example, that comes from religious criticism, most of the time Christians or Muslims. Most critics of naturalism that call naturalism a religion are Christians, which is a criticism that I never understand, because by criticizing naturalism as a religion, you are actually making a point against your religion. If you say naturalism is a religion because it is dogmatic and irrational, and you have a religion, then you also just admitted that your religion, because it is a religion, is also dogmatic and irrational too. But anyway, so Oppy is going to make a strong case for naturalism as opposed to religion. So I think it goes without saying that Oppy is an atheist, besides being a professor of philosophy in the School of Philosophical, Historical and International Studies at Monash University in Australia, and for being considered by some philosophers like William Lane Craig and Edward Feser to be the most formidable defender of atheism living today. So a little bio. Graham Robert Oppy was born on October 6th, 1960 in Australia to a Methodist family. Methodism is a Christian movement born out of Protestantism in the 18th century, so a Christian family. He used to have the conventional Christian beliefs in God, immortality, the goodness and wisdom of Christ, etc. But he left the faith in his early teens, becoming a firmly convinced atheist, like me. In 1979, he studied at Melbourne University. Then in 1987, he got his PhD from Princeton University in the US under the supervision of philosopher Gilbert Harman. And his dissertation was on the philosophy of language. As a matter of fact, his academic career started in the areas of philosophy of language and aesthetics. After getting his PhD, he returned to Australia, first as an ARC postdoctoral fellow in the philosophy program in the Research School for Social Sciences, the RSSS, and at the Australian National University, the ANU. Then he went to Monash in 1996 and started teaching there at Monash University, in which he remained. So his center of interest eventually changed early on, since the early 90s, and he is now an active and influential thinker in the philosophy of religion, and he remained an atheist since then. I have some of his books right here. I don't have everything because some of his works are very expensive. I only have 5 titles, obviously Naturalism and Religion, but I also have this one, Atheism, the Basics, which is a great book on atheism, I mean to know what atheism is and what it actually stands for, and how atheists are often portrayed by non-atheists. So it is also one of my favorites by Oppy, very accessible, very easy to read. I mean, I read a lot of Oppy besides these 5 books that I own. I read a lot of in PDF format because, money. So this is one of my favorite reads from Oppy. But I also recommend this one, Atheism and Agnosticism. It's a very, very, very short, very concise. It is published in 2018, and it is about the distinction between atheism and agnosticism, the position that argues that it is impossible to know whether there is a God. I also have this one. This is perhaps my second favorite book by Oppy, which is The Best Argument Against God. Which is a clear argument for naturalism as a better explanatory framework than theism. Oppy argues that no theistic explanation outperforms naturalistic ones when the best versions of each is compared, and we will eventually see the argument since he discusses it in Naturalism and Religion, and he also mentions this book in the bibliography. Last book I have is this one, 2006, Arguing About Gods. This is perhaps his most influential work. It's a comprehensive survey and critique of the classical and contemporary arguments for the existence of God. But he also has other important works that I also recommend as well. But unfortunately, I do not have. I mean, I don't have a physical copy, but I have them, in PDF format. His first major work was Ontological Arguments and Belief in God, published in 1996. He also had another book, also published by the same editor as this one, called Reinventing Philosophy of Religion: An Opinionated Introduction, in 2014, which is also mentioned in the bibliography of Naturalism and Religion. He also published Describing Gods, an investigation of divine attributes, in 2014, and this is one of the expensive ones. And in 2006, he also published a book about infinity and the paradoxes related in infinity, a book called Philosophical Perspectives on Infinity. Also, he edited great books about the philosophy of religion, which are ideal for students majoring in the field. He edited in 2017 the Routledge Handbook of Contemporary Philosophy of Religion, and in 2019 he edited a companion to Atheism and Philosophy in the Blackwell Companions to Philosophy series. He also edited with fellow philosopher Nick Trakakis, I think that's how it is pronounced, a 5-volume anthology called History of Western Philosophy of Religion from Antiquity to the 20th Century, and a 4-volume work called Interreligious Philosophical Dialogues, also with Trakakis, and many more books, papers, and collaborations. So really, Oppy is like one of the few people that I can think of to be this versed and knowledgeable about world religions, about the philosophy of religion. Like his scope of knowledge is insane. Like really, if you are looking for anything regarding religion, Oppy is your guy. I will put his bibliography in the video's description, as well as further readings on naturalism if you would like to explore it more. Also, you can watch many interviews with Oppy. Like he's quite known on YouTube because he's often invited on, to YouTube shows and podcasts and online debates, and he's always willing to appear on channels and talk to so many people with different backgrounds, and who knows, maybe one day I'll get to have him on the channel too. So a very lovable character, pretty involved in pop culture, and like I said, he's an atheist, but unlike many other secular thinkers and popular atheists, Oppy is not primarily driven by polemics, but by assessing religious arguments with philosophical and academic rigor, which is less marketable than the new atheists. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the past 20 years, New Atheism is or was an intellectual movement that started after 9/11 with open hostility towards religion. We can say that it is more about anti-theism than atheism. Anti-theism, that's the view that theism, the belief that there is at least one God, should be opposed, attacked, and ridiculed, whereas atheism simply means the belief that there is no God. It doesn't, however, imply that those who hold such beliefs or such views must be opposed or ridiculed or attacked, or that they pose a serious threat to others. Anti-theism doesn't just justify its hostility to theism and by extension to religion simply because religious beliefs are irrational or false, but because they cause harm to people. One of the phrases that you will find many new atheists quote is the phrase by theoretical physicist Steven Weinberg, who said that religion makes good people do evil things. Religious people not only oppose scientific progress, according to new atheists, because science contradicts their views of the natural world, thereby preventing technological or medical progress, but in the name of their gods, they can terrorize others, oppress minorities, kill innocent people, etc. So, according to new atheism, religion, and simply theism, is always a bad thing. Even if it doesn't harm others, it is a delusion. To believe in God or gods, according to the anti-theist, is a delusion. Like no individual in their right mind would believe in the existence of deities. So the movement has, 4 leaders, although none of them embrace this title. So these 4 leaders are known as the 4 horsemen of new atheism. So these include the neuroscientist Sam Harris, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, journalist Christopher Hitchens, and cognitive philosopher Daniel Dennett. So two of them died. Hitchens from cancer in 2011, aged 62, and Dennett in 2024 because of lung disease at the age of 82. You probably know them because their books were bestsellers and they were everywhere on all forms of debating platforms. You may know, for example, Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, perhaps the most famous of the bunch. But there is also Hitchens' God is not great. There's also The End of Faith by Sam Harris, which I don't have here. And these are, the fundamental texts of the movement. Now, I'd like to stress that Dennett stands out of this bunch because he doesn't reduce religion to just stupidity or manipulation like Harris, and to higher extent Dawkins and Hitchens. So he's not an anti-theist or not one as militant as the others. His writings, in which he criticizes religion, simply give naturalistic accounts of religion. His book, Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon, seeks not to insult or belittle religious believers, but to explain religion as a natural evolved phenomenon, and to encourage believers and non-believers alike to examine their commitments critically. So for Dennett, the goal is not necessarily to convince people to abandon religion, but to break the spell of unreflective belief and make religious ideas subject to rational scrutiny like any other part of human culture. So on this view, treating religion as part of the natural world rather than a supernatural exception can be liberating. It allows individuals to take responsibility for their beliefs and, ensures that faith does not become a source of irrational or harmful behavior, either for oneself or for others. So even for believers, this kind of analysis can help prevent faith from becoming a harmful or unexamined dogma. But anyways, the point is that new atheism has a simple hostility towards religion, straw manning and caricaturing belief, which ironically can also lead you to hold similarly dogmatic views that hurt others, such as, fueling Islamophobia. Hitchens, for example, despite being anti-Christian, he supported the US's invasion of Iraq. And although he's very critical of Zionism because it's also a religion, had he lived long enough to see October 7th, he'd probably blame Hamas for being Muslim fanatics and thereby, perpetuating Zionist narratives, even though I'm sure he'd be pro-Palestinian afterwards. I mean, I hope. Plus, there is the whole cringe anti-woke stance of Harris and especially Dawkins, who now, every time he has the opportunity, makes a transphobic comment and then complains about cancel culture. Like it's so ironic, these people, they've been championing humanism and constantly attacking religion with an obvious obsession with Islam, because they argue that religion excludes people, yet they started excluding minorities by gaslighting them into being, the true bigots. They'd go after anyone who they call woke, like feminists or anti-racist activists or transgender athletes, and they'd be like, yeah, you're a separatist, you're an anti-humanist, you're anti-science, and they go into those ridiculous rants about, man can't menstruate, women can't have dicks, I don't know. And, I was like shocked when I also learned that Lawrence Krauss, another best-selling astrophysicist like Neil deGrasse Tyson, edited a book called The War on Science this year, which is a collection of 39 essays by different academics addressing, the war on science. And you would think that it's going to be about things like, the Trump administration is doing, what the Trump administration is doing, like, putting an anti-vaxxer as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, or, Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and the World Health Organization, and how he's funding religious groups to push for biblical narratives in schools. That would be, appropriate for a book called The War on Science. But no, the book is about threats to academic freedom and scientific progress, not because of what we just mentioned, nope, but because of DEI programs, of wokeness, of cancel culture. And this went so far that even the fifth horseman of New Atheism, because there's a fifth one, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a Somali writer who also was an anti-theist, she converted to Christianity because she sees that atheism isn't a powerful weapon against wokeism in the culture wars. And I think you can imagine her stance on the Zionist occupation, by the way. In other words, New Atheism has become a conservative, anti-woke reactionary ideology, completely confused and as dogmatic as the dogmas they claim to dismantle and help people be skeptical of. Like, we moved from debating fundamentalists, creationists, fanatics into anti-woke, racist, and sexist sentiments now. And now their new fear actually is the postmodern neo-Marxists. And for that, even if they claim that they are still anti-theist, they keep, making temporary alliances with theists to protect Judeo-Christian values against Islam and leftist, woke ideology. So in short, New Atheism is dead, and it is a good thing that it died, because we need actual philosophers, with the exception of Dennett, because he is an actual philosopher, like the guy, to talk about this. So Oppy's way of arguing is precisely the opposite of that the New Atheists. He doesn't belittle believers in his criticism, but simply compares two different worldviews, the religious one and the naturalistic one, his own, and judges them based on their coherence, explanatory power, and their simplicity. If you have a worldview that is simpler with as much or more explanatory power than another, meaning if it explains as much as or better than the other natural the natural world, and it is more coherent, then that worldview is simply better in the sense of more reliable and reasonable. This, however, isn't to force those who hold religious views to abandon them, but rather that they let the non-religious ones hold their non-religious worldviews. And obviously, when religious worldviews want to influence science, it's normal that we oppose those worldviews, not by forcing atheism, but by pushing back those views into their appropriate place. So many things that the New Atheist said about religion are true. Like, it's undeniable that many people are suffering because of religious beliefs. Religion exerts a lot of pressure on others, and yes, it causes wars, it justified slavery, it subjugated different groups, it persecuted, minorities, etc. Let's also not forget that atheists have also been persecuted all over the world, and ever since the beginning of religion. As I said in Atheism, the basics, Oppy gives accounts of how to define atheism and how to distinguish it from theism, agnosticism, and also what Oppy calls the innocents. So innocence means those who never contemplated any issues related to the existence of God. But the book also makes an assessment of different arguments put forth by atheists, and Oppy isn't like an apologetic. An apologist. When atheists make bad arguments, he calls them out for it. He also gives a review of famous atheists through the ages, from antiquity to the modern day. But the book also addresses the stereotypes that atheists put up with every day, as well as the persecution we face on a daily basis, the stigma, the discrimination, etc. Many of us must hide our atheism so that we don't, experience political oppression, social isolation, or just ostracism from friends and families. So we are often accused of being intolerant against religious people, as if religious people were tolerant towards us. We're the ones who always must reassure society that we're not trying to convert them. When at every discussion we had with religious people, they always try to convert us while calling us ignorant, stupid, mentally sick, arrogant, selfish, and immoral. And such accusations even come from the closest people to us, from close friends, but also from family members. Some even make physical threats or emotional abuse if we say that we are atheists. And let's not forget that not that long ago, we'd be put to death for expressing atheism, or even, something that others take for atheism. And unfortunately, in some countries today, those practices are still in place and backed up by laws. So some of the most abject and archaic practices that that are still around today, they're all backed up by religious beliefs. So it is also understandable for new atheists to adopt confrontational approaches. But by the way, Oppy has a section in the last chapter of the book where he discusses the phenomenon of new atheism. But he even says that the term new atheism is misleading because all of the tactics and arguments used by the new atheists, they aren't new at all. Atheists have been using them since forever. The only new things perhaps is that now they can publish their views without having to be anonymous. But there is nothing new about it. He also explicitly rejects the reduction that new atheists do of religion, saying that new atheists depict all believers as extremists and political anti-pluralists, which isn't true and is deeply unfair and ideologically suspicious. This, as I said, doesn't take away the fact that atheists are persecuted, and more than once, theists act like they are the victims of the bad atheists when they live in countries in which the majority is theist. Where most positions of power are taken by theists, you won't find a single deputy who is openly atheist. For example, in my country, where atheists are currently culturally underrepresented, if not completely absent from any cultural production. And on top of that, atheists are more likely to be stereotyped by theists than the other way around. Oppy lists the main stereotypes that atheists must put up with since the early days of the Old Testament. Atheists are, for example, untrustworthy, they are criminals, they are immoral, they have no values, they don't believe in anything, they are selfish, they are unhappy, they are emotionally unstable, they have mental health problems, they are sexually deviant, even physically unhealthy, they have low life expectancy, atheists are ignorant and horrible, atheism is unlivable and irrational, and some even reverse it, calling atheists the true fundamentalists, that atheists are political ideologues, that atheists hate God, that atheism is just another religion, that atheists are, anti-religion, etc. So all of these are, of course, wrong. They are wrong stereotypes, they are false stereotypes, and Oppy debunks every single claim through empirical data. So even though we call out the new atheists because they are often unfair towards believers, this doesn't get theists off the hook for their bullshit. Anyways, anyone who wants to understand what atheism really is and what it stands for, read this book by Oppy. So to go back to the main book, as an atheist, Oppy rejects theism because it has less theoretical virtues than atheism, or more precisely, naturalism. What we'll try to argue for throughout this book is that naturalism is a simpler, more coherent and comprehensive worldview than any theistic alternative. Alright, so I think that's a good overview of who Oppy is and of the background, and now I suggest that we jump into the book and start reading the introduction. But first, there's a small preface in which Oppy says how he came to write the book. It started as an invitation by the editors of the series in 2011, and he was supposed to finish the book by 2015. But he finished it in 2018, during a sabbatical of the second half of 2017. I also like the fact that he was grateful to the postgraduate students he was supervising during this time, because apparently he had regular discussions with them about the themes of the book as he was writing it, and included, their names. So that's cute. It's like his students also contributed to his work, and honestly, I think that's how it should be. Students should be recognized as colleagues to their professors and teachers. He also thanked his friends and family, the university, etc. So that's a little bit of context for the preface of how this book was written. All right, now the introduction. So, which also serves as the first chapter of the book. So it opens with a long quote from Conservapedia. So for those who don't know what's that, well, it's a Wikipedia made by conservatives who felt that regular Wikipedia is too woke and biased against Christians. Like, I'm not kidding. It was created by Andrew Schlafly. That's the son of Phyllis Schlafly. That conservative activist in the 60s and 70s who was openly anti-feminist, anti-gay rights. She openly opposed the notion of gender pay gap, saying that it is a hoax invented by the feminists to demolish conservative values. She also denied marital rape, saying that if a woman marries, she consented to sex at any moment. So, very delightful and objective people. So her son launched this Wikipedia alternative with funny, unbiased entries, such as, the Big Bang Theory is false, that the Earth is 6,000 years old. You just go to the entry age of the Earth, and it's the first thing that you read. The first thing that you read is actually this. I'm going to read to you the entry in the age of the Earth. So it says, all verifiable evidence indicates that the Earth is about 6,000 or less than 10,000 years old. Yet, with circular reasoning and implausible assumptions, liberals insist that the Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years. So, a very serious and unbiased source, unlike Wikipedia. Really, just pay the platform a visit and just write something like evolution or homosexuality, conversion therapy, feminism or Marxism, and go have a laugh. It's like you just take every bias a conservative has in his mind and you just put it there. So one of their, kryptonite is naturalism. Everything that they dislike is for them naturalistic. So here's how a conservative thinks. Anything that disputes the existence or involvement of God in the world is bound to bring sin upon us. Since naturalism is precisely that we explain, things without God's intervention, then naturalism leads to sin. Homosexuality, the evolution, the Big Bang Theory, the age of the Earth, everything that conservatives don't like are all because of naturalism. So you can imagine that naturalism is their pet peeve. Naturalism is Satan for conservatives. Like, read what they write about evolution, for example, and the first thing that they'll mention to discredit it is they mention it's a naturalist theory. Everything they don't like, they relate to naturalism, because for them, naturalism is irrational since it rejects God or God's interventions in natural phenomena. And therefore, for a conservative, science is only scientific if it agrees with the Bible. Otherwise, it's irrational and ideological. And this is where, you have that weird objection they make. They say that it's a religion. Like they say science is a religion. In their entry on evolution, they straight up write that evolution is a religion, not science, because for them, it doesn't make sense. Okay? Evolution is not science according to Conservapedia. It is a religion. I mean, I have to read another quote from another entry to you, like since Conservapedia rejects evolution and dismisses it as unscientific. It obviously, I think it won't surprise you, it obviously embraces creationism. And I just want to read to you what they say in the beginning of their entry on creationism. They wrote this in bold letters, by the way. They say, accepting creationism helps strengthen faith and thereby overcome addiction and anxiety. Unbiased science supports creationism. So that's the quote. That's an actual quote from Conservapedia. Now, should I say more? Anyways, so naturally, it also has an entry on philosophical naturalism. And this is what Oppy quotes. This is from the last section of the entry, when after, having said all the dumbest shit in the book, after even calling naturalism blasphemy, as if it's a legit criticism, they now assess naturalism. And so that quote given by Oppy is how conservatives assess philosophical naturalism. So let's see what they have to say about it. Philosophical naturalism has consistently shown itself to be a non-scientific religious perspective that is adverse to impartial inquiry into the nature of reality according to the scientific principles of methodological naturalism. Its adherents and defenders have consistently shown by their writings and opinions a prejudicial intolerance of fundamentally human intuitive understandings of reality and an anti-intellectual rejection of compelling evidence that has proven acceptable to profound thinkers and researchers. It is not science, nor is it a scientific approach. Ipso facto, by its a priori rejection of the possibility of the supernatural, philosophical naturalism represents an approach that is militantly and overly hostile to religion and human culture. So very unbiased indeed. So this is how critics of naturalism portray naturalism. This, like the worst thing is that this isn't a straw man. Oppy didn't pick a weak criticism to represent all criticisms of naturalism. Like, this is actually the standard critique, even among academics. Now, it's obviously a religious critique. You may argue that maybe all religious critiques of naturalism are as ridiculous as this one, but there may be, non-religious critiques that are more rigorous, unbiased, and honest. But that's not the point of Oppy's book. It is precisely to address criticism that comes primarily from religious critiques. That's what concerns us here. So yes, this is a standard criticism. As Oppy says about the Conservapedia quote, it serves as well as any. Every time someone tries to refute naturalism from a religious perspective, they will give a critique that contains the following 8 points. 1. Philosophical naturalism is a religion, or at any rate, a religious perspective. Philosophical naturalism is adverse to impartial inquiry. Philosophical naturalism is anti-scientific, or at any rate, non-scientific. It is inherently prejudicial and intolerant of natural basic human beliefs. It is an anti-intellectual rejection of compelling evidence. 6. It makes an a priori rejection of the supernatural. 7. It is militantly and overly hostile to religion. And 8. It is militantly and overly hostile to human culture. These are the points every religious critique of naturalism will make. This is the anti-naturalist starter pack, or the rap sheet as he calls it. So the point of the book is then to see if these points actually hold. If it is true that naturalism is a religion, if it's is it true, that it is truly adverse to impartial inquiry? Is it anti-scientific or non-scientific, or any anti-intellectual rejection of compelling evidence? So all of these questions, is it prejudicial and intolerant of natural basic human beliefs? Does it make an a priori rejection of the supernatural? Is it militantly and overtly hostile to religion and human culture? And even if it is hostile to religion, does it mean that it is hostile to human culture? So the book will answer to these questions with a negative. None of these points are true, and this is what Oppy will try to demonstrate. Naturalism and religion is therefore a rejection of the rap sheet that we have here. Now, the first thing we need to address is the terminology of the rap sheet, because, as Oppy says, it uses difficult terms. By difficult, he means technical or academic terms, but he doesn't mean technical or academic terms, but he means vague terms that can have different meanings or definitions in different contexts. Terms like philosophy, religion, science, culture, evidence, and impartial inquiry aren't terms that we can throw without properly defining them. If I define religion as the true word of God and I reduce this definition to the truth, then if something rejects religion, then that thing has rejected truth. This is obviously absurd, because you need to argue why would religion's appropriate definition be truth. There are, way more than enough good reasons today to be skeptical of equating religion with truth. And also, that doesn't mean that if we agree that religion shouldn't be synonymous with truth, then we must abandon religion altogether. We can consider that all of the terms mentioned are important. We can all be, in favor of what philosophy, religion, culture, science denote, but disagree about exactly what they are. So, like Oppy says, we need to be clear about these terms, getting them right, and also we need to clear about their relation with one another. So let's start with some basic definitions. These will, of course, be explored more in the subsequent chapters. So first, I think we need to define the most important term here, and that is philosophical naturalism. So Oppy says, naturalism is a claim, roughly the conjunctive claim that A, there are none but natural causal entities with none but natural causal powers, and B, well-established science is our touchstone for identifying natural causal entities and natural causal powers. So, conjunctive claim means a claim that brings together two claims. Naturalism is made of two propositions. First, there are only natural causal entities with only natural causal powers. In other words, every entity has a cause, which is another entity. So entities cause other entities and are caused by entities. So we can call them causal entities. The ability to cause and be caused by is called causal power. So every causal entity has causal powers. But naturalism's first claim is that the nature of these entities and their causal power is natural. So we need to understand what is meant by natural here, but that's for the next chapter. So Oppy says that all entities are natural entities. It's not like he's saying that there can be non-natural entities, but they simply don't interact with us. They don't cause anything natural and aren't caused by anything natural. It's not like saying natural entities can either be caused by can neither be caused by nor cause non-natural entities, but those non-natural entities exist in some sort of unreachable dimension or something like that. No, he's saying that these non-natural entities simply don't exist. And of course, since natural causal entities cannot cause or be caused by non-natural ones, their causal powers have to be natural too. So only natural causal entities with natural causal powers can exist. That's the first claim. And the second claim to have naturalism is its definition of science. So we also get a definition of science, which is our touchstone for identifying these natural causal entities and their natural causal power. So that's science, the best way to identify these entities and their powers. So this is naturalism in a nutshell. It means its main features are that it considers that reality is made of natural causal entities and natural causal powers, and that science is the best way to identify them. Now, does this mean that every view that includes non-natural causal entities and causal powers is a religion? Well, no. Religion does require non-natural entities and powers, as we will see, but not every claim that includes those entities and powers is religious. In this sense, naturalism and theism can be appropriately compared as non-religious claims. Theism, as Oppy says, is the claim that there is at least one God. So this simple claim isn't enough to make theism a religion. So far, this is just what Oppy calls a big picture. We will explain what that term means in the next video. It's a technical term and an important one in Oppy's philosophy, but for now we will just explain it as an account of reality or about the nature of entities that make reality. We can just say that a big picture is a worldview. So both naturalism and theism are big pictures, since each makes such a claim. The former says that there are only natural causal entities with natural causal powers, while theism claims that there is at least one non-natural causal entity with non-natural causal powers, God. So these are big pictures, but they are not religions. If a religion has a theistic big picture, then we can say that it is a theistic religion. If the family or set of big pictures associated with a particular religion all entail that there is at least one God, then that religion is theistic. If it claims that there is only one God, it's monotheistic. If it says that there is more than one God, it's polytheistic. But again, very important, simply saying that you have a theistic belief doesn't make that belief religious yet. It only makes it a big picture, whether monotheistic or polytheistic. So if you say that theism is per se religion, you conflated religion with big pictures. So this means that you also don't need to have theistic big pictures to make a religion. You can have religions with non-theistic big pictures, with big pictures that do not entail that there is at least one God. Naturalism is obviously a non-theistic big picture, but does it mean that naturalism can be or is a religion like its critics say? Well, no. Non-theistic big pictures only say that there are no gods or don't know whether gods exist. But gods aren't the only non-natural causal entities you can think of. A theistic worldview includes gods as either the only one or one among other non-natural entities. But you can have big pictures that don't have gods but have other non-natural entities, that have non-natural entities other than gods. For Oppy, to have a religion, you just need a big picture that entails the existence of non-natural causal entities and or non-natural causal powers. So if your big picture doesn't entail such entities and causal powers, your big picture doesn't become a religion. So while theistic and many non-theistic big pictures can be part of religions and become religions, naturalism cannot. In other words, the big picture of naturalism is simply incompatible with religion. As Oppy says, there is no religion whose associated big pictures entail 1. That there are none but natural causal entities with none but natural causal powers, and B, that well-established science is our touchstone for identifying natural causal entities and natural causal powers. Obviously, this needs further development because so far it can seem like an argument from definitions that can sound arbitrary to you, just like conservatives do. But that's what we will do in the next chapter. This is just the introduction, where we give, the main points that Oppy will try then to demonstrate. So, if we agree on this, it is clear that naturalism cannot be a religion. So conservatives and non-naturalists who criticize naturalism for being a religion are logically wrong. The same goes for their charge against naturalism that it is unscientific, since well-established science is our touchstone for identifying natural causal entities and natural causal powers. It is hard to see how naturalism per se could be either anti-scientific or non-scientific. Now, the definition of well-established science, meaning today's science, today's scientific method and consensus, etc., as a touchstone for identifying these natural entities and powers, needs further explanation. Briefly put, Oppy argues two main things about well-established science. It, one, has not identified any non-natural causal entities or non-natural causal powers, and B, it has not embraced any methods that will identify non-natural causal entities or non-natural causal powers at some point in the future. So, he says that since it didn't identify any non-natural causal entities or causal powers and has no method to identify such entities and powers in the future, clearly science is more aligned with naturalism than with non-naturalist big pictures, let alone religion. Now, you can say just because science didn't identify non-natural causal entities or powers or didn't embrace any method for that yet, it doesn't mean that those entities don't exist, which again is what naturalism claims. To move from science didn't identify non-natural entities to there are no non-natural entities can sound like a stretch. But here, it's about the charge that naturalism is unscientific. We will go back to that leap, but from what we just read, you cannot say that naturalism is unscientific. If science hasn't identified non-natural entities and has no method to do so in the future, then a big picture that claims that there are no non-natural entities will be closer to science than one that affirms the existence of non-natural entities. And Oppy gives the following definition of science. He says, science is, roughly speaking, a collective enterprise of data-driven description, prediction, and understanding in which universal expert agreement functions as regulative ideal. The only methods that science embraces are methods that are consonant with the regulative idea of producing universal expert agreement. Now you can argue that technically there is no universal expert agreement on many things in science, and that's fair. There's a lot of disagreements, but such disagreements rarely involve non-natural causal entities or non-natural causal powers. So the fact remains that we do have a universal expert consensus or agreement when it comes to the nature of entities that science deals with. The scientific methods that we have at our disposal serves the purpose of producing universal expert agreement, meaning that experts agree on the findings we get through scientific methods. So far, those methods only lead us to natural causal entities and causal powers, and we don't have any evidence that things will change in the near or even long future. So far, we only have universal expert consensus about the existence of natural entities and powers. And this, therefore, sounds more in sync with well-established science than trying to argue for and prove the existence of non-natural entities and powers. So with the current methods, you'll get higher chances at finding consensus about the existence of natural entities than non-natural ones. As Oppy says, we are not currently in possession of even one method consonant with the production of universal expert consensus about the existence of non-natural entities or the exercise of non-natural causal powers. Alright then, so far we have two big pictures, a naturalistic big picture or naturalistic big pictures and non-naturalistic big pictures. The former argues that there are only natural causal entities and causal powers, while the latter says the opposite, that there are non-natural entities and or powers. Science, which is about finding universal expert agreement, deals with exclusively natural causal entities and causal powers, and thereby naturalistic big pictures are more consonant with science than non-naturalistic big pictures. And so with this, we should be able to refute both charges that naturalism is a religion and that it is unscientific. But what about the other charges, like the accusation of prejudice, intolerance, and intellectual rejection of evidence? So we need to go further. Obviously, naturalism makes a normative claim, not just a descriptive one. It doesn't just describe the content of a big picture, it also promotes or defends and elaborates that specific big picture. In other words, naturalism says that we should embrace naturalism because naturalism is the best big picture when compared with non-naturalistic big pictures. But does this mean that it's prejudiced, intolerant, or rejects evidence? Well, no. It will depend on its method of assessing different big pictures, and that method must be impartial and reliable, thereby rejecting the charge of partiality, intolerance, prejudice against other big pictures and evidence. So what is this method about? Well, here it is. We develop all the big pictures in which we are interested with the same level of care, to the same level of detail, and then we make an objective, comparative assessment of their theoretical virtues relative to all of the available evidence. Among the big pictures that we are assessing, the best are those that do best in balancing the full range of theoretical virtues, giving all of the available evidence. So that's the method. You take all the big pictures we are interested in. Obviously, that includes theistic worldviews, because the charge often comes from people who hold theistic worldviews, big pictures. Then we develop them with the same level of care for details. In other words, we don't misrepresent them, we don't strawman them, we examine everything that they have to say, we look at their theoretical virtues relative to all available evidence. And what does this last bit mean? Well, to look at their theoretical virtues relative to evidence, let's start with evidence. Well, Oppy defines evidence as everything on which all parties to big picture disputes agree. If someone who holds a naturalistic big picture and another holds a non-naturalistic one, and they both agree on something, well, that's evidence. We take everything that all big pictures involved agree on and see how they deal with that evidence. We don't set aside anything that they agree on, all right? To see how they deal with evidence, with what they both agree on, is where the theoretical virtues come in. These virtues are, Oppy says, consistency, they are consistency, breadth and depth of explanation of evidence, and fit with established science and so on. In other words, we see how the big pictures can account for evidence. If they are able to explain it, or does the evidence challenge the big picture, this will determine their theoretical virtues. And the big pictures, compatible, consistent, and coherent with the available evidence, well, is going to take the win. Two different big pictures will have theoretical differences because they will both explain the same evidence in different ways. They explain what they both agree on, but in different ways. We both see a rainbow, we both agree that it is a rainbow, that's the evidence. Now, how do we explain that? A naturalistic big picture will say that it's light, it is light that is going through, water particles in the atmosphere, while a non-naturalistic big picture will say something like it's a spirit or a deity that causes the rainbow. So this is a disagreement. So what we agree on is evidence, what we disagree on is theoretical difference. The theoretical virtues are assessed when these differences are weighted. Which explanation is better, the one that doesn't involve non-natural entities or the one that does? Now, Oppy also specifies that assessing big pictures isn't a causal thing, meaning that to say that the naturalistic big picture is better isn't accounted within the big picture itself. In other words, a theory of the evaluative and normative, saying that this big picture is better or we should embrace this big picture, is independent from the causal. The method to assess big pictures has a different theory from a theory that explains a causality. Naturalism is a theory of causality. It seeks to give an account on causal phenomena, yes, but assessing a theory of causality requires a normative theory rather than a descriptive one. We have a theory about the causal domain, that is a descriptive theory, and then we need a theory about assessing theories. So which virtues should be considered appropriate to assess a theory about the causal domain? Obviously, a theory about assessing theories of the causal domain cannot be part of that domain either. And so that's why the two are independent. But I think the method that Oppy has laid down here is fair and impartial, and naturalists as well as non-naturalists can agree on it. So if by following that method we see that naturalism has more theoretical virtues than non-naturalist big pictures, we can say that naturalism is intolerant or prejudiced against non-naturalism. But this is a point we will go back to because it needs further development and Oppy is aware of it. He says that he will bring throughout the book justification for why the two theories should be independent. Now, from this method, we can also reject the claim that naturalism makes an a priori rejection of the supernatural. The supernatural is another term for non-natural. Okay, now naturalism does reject the supernatural, but not as an a priori rejection. A priori rejection means that you start by rejecting the supernatural when rejecting the supernatural is what you have to prove. You don't start your argument by saying that there is no supernatural stuff because that's supposed to be your conclusion. So an a priori rejection of the supernatural involves an unjustified rejection, as if we simply, decided to reject the supernatural from the start. But given the method of assessing big pictures proposed, that charge doesn't hold anymore. We said that Oppy's method consists in balancing theoretical virtues in the light of total evidence of each big picture and then compare them. The one whose virtues outweighs those of the other is considered the best big picture. So for Oppy, what justifies philosophical naturalism, if indeed it is justified, is that the best big pictures are best naturalistic big pictures. And that's according to the method that we just described. Hence, like I said, yes, naturalism is by definition an exclusive commitment to the natural, thereby a rejection of the supernatural, but this rejection and commitment aren't a priori. Now, let's go back to the charge that naturalism is a religion. This is apparently also hostile, that it is also, like the charge that it is a religion. It is weird because critics of naturalism also say that naturalism is hostile to religion. I mean, they say that it is a religion, and then at the same time they say that it is hostile to religion, so go figure. But we say that naturalism, because it explicitly endorses natural causal entities, it cannot be a religion, since a religion necessarily requires a non-naturalistic big picture. But we also said that it is not enough to make a religion. There are other elements required for a non-naturalistic big picture to become associated with a religion. So now we will get to religion's definition. Now, religion is a very vague term and many dispute what counts as religion. But Oppy borrows his definition from Scott Atran, to whom we will come back. So very roughly based on Atran's definition, religions are Passionate communal displays of costly commitments resulting from evolutionary canalization and convergence of A. widespread beliefs in non-natural entities with non-natural causal powers, B. mastery of people's existential anxieties, and C. ritualized coordination in communion and intimate fellowship. So for there to be a religion, you need, first, a widespread belief in non-natural entities with non-natural causal powers. That's the big picture. But the most important feature of religion is you need to display a commitment to those entities and powers. That commitment needs to be passionate and communal. You do it in communities. And also that commitment has to be costly. Otherwise, it won't be serious enough. The commitment must be like a sacrifice, okay? Also, that commitment must have a therapeutic goal. It must make people feel like they have mastery over their existential anxieties. And this, I think, is obvious. And lastly, for that commitment to be considered religious, it needs to be ritualized and ordered in coordination with the other members of the religion. So the rituals aren't individual or random. They also need to be regular and involve all members of the community. When you have all of these elements together, you get a religion. Put simply, a religion requires communal displays in ritualized form of costly commitments that enable mastery of existential anxieties. So you have a non-naturalistic big picture, so belief in non-natural entities and or power, that is widespread, meaning shared, which means shared by many people. And you need existential anxieties that you try to master or to alleviate, and a coordination in rituals of that community that shares those beliefs and establish intimate bonds with one another, as well as the entities and powers that they believe in. So you have these three elements together, and with enough time, a costly commitment that is displayed passionately and communally to those entities and powers emerges, and so you have a religion. It's then, again, logically clear that naturalism and religion are mutually exclusive. Without those entities to commit to, you cannot have a religion. So as Oppy says, no one can be both a naturalist and a genuine follower of a religion. So I should also point that this doesn't exclude or rule out atheistic religions, since atheism is simply the denial of gods, but not necessarily other non-natural causal entities or powers. So one can be an atheist and a follower of a religion, like, religious atheists. All naturalists are obviously atheists, but not all atheists are naturalists. And I think this is obvious. That being said, just because naturalists cannot have a religion doesn't mean that naturalists are hostile to religion and religious believers, or that they are militantly hostile, meaning that we actively try to convince people to leave their faith or belittle them or whatever. The only thing that we have from this is that each group takes the other group's belief as false. Naturalists consider the supernatural beliefs of religions false, and religious believers consider that naturalistic beliefs are false. But from these points, from these propositions, in either case, you cannot infer nothing about attitudes to have towards those who hold those beliefs. In other words, just because a belief is false, or just because I consider a belief to be false, doesn't mean that we can infer anything about the attitude that I have to have towards those who have the belief that I consider false. In short, you cannot be a dick to someone just because their belief is false, or you consider that their belief is false. And also, you are not compelled to be nice to them if their beliefs are true. The truth value of beliefs don't imply any appropriate attitude towards those who hold those beliefs. So it is wrong to say that naturalists are hostile to religion just by virtue of being naturalists. Sure, there can be naturalists that are dicks to religious people, just like, many religious believers are dicks to naturalists, to atheists, and to agnostics. But that attitude, whether collective or individual, doesn't follow from the big picture itself. Okay, so that's for the charge that naturalism is militantly hostile to religion. But what about the next and last charge that naturalism and naturalistic big pictures are militantly hostile to human culture? Well, that claim is just wrong, like the previous one, but it's not just wrong, but it's absurd. You can say that naturalism runs counter to many natural human beliefs, because when we look at all human cultures, we rarely encounter a culture that doesn't have non-naturalistic big pictures. Almost all cultures seem to include beliefs in non-natural causal entities and causal powers. So you would think that non-naturalist beliefs are the natural, meaning the normal or appropriate beliefs for humans. In short, human culture is supposed to have non-naturalistic big pictures. However, there are many counter-arguments to this. First, as Oppy says, but those natural between quotation marks, those natural non-naturalistic beliefs are never beliefs on which there is universal expert consensus. Those natural non-naturalistic beliefs typically divide people rather than bring them together. Everyone, no matter what else they believe, agrees that the vast majority of natural non-naturalistic beliefs are false. That naturalists go a little further and claim that all of these natural non-naturalistic beliefs are false does not make the belief of naturalists any more militantly and overtly hostile to human culture than are the beliefs of everyone else. So, in other words, every non-naturalistic belief says that all of the other non-naturalistic beliefs are false. Christian non-naturalistic beliefs say that pagan non-naturalistic beliefs are false. Muslims say that Christian non-natural beliefs, naturalistic beliefs are false. Jews says that Muslims non-naturalistic beliefs are false, etc. So every non-naturalist belief argues that it alone is a true belief. And so by following this logic, we would have to say that all other non-naturalist beliefs that are not the ones we call true must be hostile to human culture as well. But that is obviously absurd. So there is already a huge agreement between naturalist and non-naturalist about the vast majority of non-naturalistic beliefs, meaning that both naturalists and non-naturalists agree that most non-naturalistic beliefs are false. For every non-naturalist, the vast majority of non-naturalists, those who have different beliefs, are false. So naturalists agree, except that they go the extra step. For naturalists, it's not just the vast majority of non-naturalistic beliefs that are false, but all naturalistic beliefs. But if we must follow the charge's argument, then we end up agreeing with naturalism too. If we say it is necessary for human culture to have non-naturalistic beliefs because all cultures so far have them, if it's the vast majority of cases, then we should do the same. Then, since the vast majority of such beliefs are false, we then have to say that it is necessary for human culture to have false beliefs, and thereby admitting that every non-naturalistic belief is false, and thus agreeing with naturalism. A second objection now to the charge that by dismissing non-naturalistic beliefs as false, naturalism dismisses entire cultures, all of human cultures, is that this charge seems to imply that you cannot have human culture without non-naturalistic big pictures, which is a big controversial claim. If by culture we mean art, humanities, and sciences, or to the political, business, and media spheres, then there is nothing in naturalism that implies an impossibility to contribute to those things. Naturalists can make art, they can contribute to the humanities and sciences and the other spheres of human life and culture, obviously. So the charge naturalism is hostile to culture breaks down. Now, does this mean that there can be no objection to naturalism? Well, no. Legitimate criticism of philosophical naturalism may exist, as Oppy says, but They sure can be as easy and ridiculous as the Conservapedia one if they are to be considered legitimate. But a criticism of naturalism requires that a non-naturalist big picture displays better theoretical virtues than it. While some naturalistic big pictures can provide better theoretical virtues than some naturalistic big picture, the issue isn't in that some. Naturalism doesn't have just one big picture, but many that have received various changes throughout the 70 years of its popularity among professional philosophers. Naturalists have refuted the naturalist big pictures of other naturalists relatively easily. So obviously legitimate criticism is possible, and we will go through some critiques in the next chapter. However, as Oppy says, many opponents of naturalism take it to be a big target, meaning that they take it to be a position with flaws that are so big and obvious that you can easily take it down. And again, naturalism has many variants. Many naturalist big pictures don't hold well against criticism and did fall, but as Oppy says, naturalism itself is a much smaller target than many of its opponents imagine, and it is not threatened when even quite widely shared naturalistic big pictures fall. So the book is precisely a defense of that small target. So now let's take a look at the book's plan, starting with the table of contents. So it has 9 chapters, including the introduction. So we will have 8 chapters to go through. Most chapters can be covered in just one episode each, except for 3 chapters, chapter 5, 6, and 8. Chapter 5 and 6 will each require 2 episodes, and the 8th chapter will require 3. So in total, this means that we have 12 episodes to cover the whole book, so 12 weeks ahead of us. The conclusion will be included in the 3rd episode on chapter 8, because it's just 1 page long. So here are the chapters after the introduction. What is naturalism? What is religion? Can there be naturalistic religion? The answer is going to be no. Does science defeat naturalism? In other words, does science provide or support the idea that there are non-natural causal entities and causal powers? Spoiler alert, it doesn't, so it doesn't defeat naturalism. Then we have, does religion defeat naturalism? Again, it doesn't, since religion has to prove that either non-natural entities and powers do exist, or prove that it is irrational or incoherent to deny their existence, and it fails to do so. Then, does science defeat religion? That's going to be an interesting chapter. And lastly, does naturalism defeat religion? And the answer is yes, since naturalism, best naturalist big pictures have more theoretical virtues than best religious big pictures. But again, this doesn't mean that non-naturalistic big pictures must be abandoned, or that it is irrational to hold them, or even that it should be prohibited to turn, non-naturalistic big pictures into religions. So each chapter is divided into sections. Chapter 2, What is Naturalism, which we will read next week, has 6 sections. The 3rd chapter, What is Religion, has 7 sections. 5th chapter, Can there be naturalistic religion, 6 sections. 5, Does science defeat naturalism, has 21 sections, but they are quite short. The 6th chapter, Does religion defeat naturalism, has 2 parts. Part 1, 16 sections, and part 2, 6 sections. Then the 7th chapter, Does science defeat religion, has 6 sections. And lastly, the 8th chapter, Does naturalism defeat religion, has 16 sections. Now let's see what each chapter is about in further detail. Chapter 1, What is Naturalism? So it has 6 sections, as we said. First, section 1, first pass, it begins by offering Oppy's characterization of naturalism, then surveys a wide range of internal disagreements among naturalists, such as must causal entities be spatio-temporally located? Do non-causal entities exist? Are all properties causal powers? Is mental causation real? and most naturalists accept physicalism, materialism, scientism, humanism, empiricism, or reject first philosophy, meaning a foundational a priori metaphysics that claim, priority over science in determining what is fundamentally real. Second section, natural and non-natural. It explores what it means to classify something as natural. Oppy argues that even though completed science is ultimately the authority on what counts as natural, current established science is already an excellent predictor of what completed science would say. Section 3, what might have been. This discusses whether naturalists should claim that naturalism is necessarily true in all possible words. While naturalists can reasonably disagree on this, Oppy's metaphysical stance argues that yes, naturalism is necessarily true. Section 4, big pictures. Obviously, this is about big pictures. We'll define them more as more than just worldviews, but as the best approximations that we have to philosophical theories of everything. And so this section also mentions some naturalistic supervenience theses that are contentious even among naturalists. Section 5, attitudes. This examines what kind of doxatic attitudes naturalists may hold towards naturalism. We'll consider two conceptions of belief here: a binary conception of belief, one either believes or does not, that's the all or nothing matter, and a probabilistic conception. Belief involves, degrees of confidence. And the last section, critics, argues that many critics of naturalism construct unfair and uncharitable interpretations of naturalistic positions. In particular, Oppy claims that many standard critics of naturalism can be found in the essays in the 2000 book, Naturalism, A Critical Analysis by William Lane Craig and G.P. Moreland. And they amount to nothing but attacks on strawman versions of naturalism rather than serious defensive naturalistic views. In other words, it's another example of conservapedia level of criticism. So then we move to the second chapter, which is about defining naturalism, its epistemology, whether it is reasonable to consider it necessarily true, what big pictures are, what attitudes to express towards beliefs, and finally, standard criticism of naturalism. The third chapter now, what is religion, does the same thing. It defines religion and discusses controversial questions regarding religion. Section 1, data, begins with a survey of empirical data on religions and religious affiliations. It highlights the methodological challenges involved in collecting and interpreting demographic data about religious groups. Second section, definitions, reviews the historical attempts to define religion and adopts a working definition based on Atran's definition from his book, from his 2002 book, In Gods We Trust. Section 3, Inside Outside, responds to the objection that an adequate definition of religion must come from insiders, the believers themselves, but Oppy argues that an insider definition of religion is impossible. Insider views are too diverse, too partisan, and too bound to particular traditions to serve as universal definitions. Section 4, spirituality, addresses the suggestion that religion should be defined in terms of spirituality, and Oppy, he rejects this, noting that the concept of spirituality is even less clearly defined and far more ambiguous than religion. And 5 is naturalism a religion, argues that naturalism is not a religion. You need more than a broad religious big picture to be religious, and you need to also engage in the practices of that religion. But you can be a naturalist simply by, holding a naturalistic big picture. You don't need rituals, you don't need communal practices, no norms analogous to religious observance are required. And section 6 is philosophy a religion, argues that philosophy is also not a religion. It is simply a theoretical discipline. Participating in it does not require involvement in specifically religious forms of practice. And the last section, Theories of Religion, provides an overview of major theories of religion, cognitive, evolutionary, social, psychological, and others. And Oppy notes that the adopted working definition aligns well with contemporary cognitive evolutionary accounts, while also retaining useful insights from earlier traditions of theorizing. And so that's for chapter 3. Now, chapter 4, can there be a naturalistic religion? It has 6 sections, and obviously it will answer with the negative. There cannot be a naturalistic religion, since a religion besides the practices also needs a non-naturalistic big picture. So we will go through some big pictures that can be mistaken for naturalistic ones and are often used to justify the existence of naturalistic religions. Pantheism, for example, Spinoza's philosophical system, will be the subject of the first section here. So section 1, Pantheism. It asks whether natural reality can be called divine. And Oppy argues that identifying nature as divine conflicts with the naturalist commitment that all causal reality is purely natural and not divine in any metaphysical sense. So pantheism therefore clashes with naturalism. Then there is panentheism in the second section, which looks at another big picture that is said to be compatible with naturalism and constitutes a religion. Panentheism, which holds that God is both immanent and transcendent. It is both immanent in nature and it transcends nature. It is also beyond nature. It is both in nature and beyond nature. And so the section includes a critique of Australian philosopher Mark Johnson's 2009 book, Saving God, Religion After Idolatry, which is an attempt to defend a naturalistic panentheism. Section 3, Religious Naturalism. It critiques theorists who aim at creating big naturalistic naturalistic big pictures by enriching them with values and attitudes often associated with religion. Oppy emphasizes that naturalism imposes very few restrictions on evaluative and emotional commitments, meaning that attempts to turn naturalism into a religion-like system add unnecessary confusion. Then section 4, we have naturalistic religion. This one argues that there are no coherent hybrid worldviews that are both naturalistic and genuinely religious. Here another philosopher is criticized by Oppy, John Bishop, and particularly his 2018 essay, A Naturalist Christian Theism, which claims adherence to both naturalism and the received Christian faith. So the essay is compiled in the book Inter-Christian Religious Dialogues, edited by Oppy and Trakakis, that we mentioned earlier. Section 5, Religious of Humanity. It examines proposals by philosophers such as Auguste Comte and John Stuart Mill to create a secular naturalistic religion of humanity. So he criticizes these for failing to provide credible mechanisms for addressing existential anxieties, something traditional religions typically attempt to handle. And 6, last section, Religious Humanism. So this one assesses efforts by humanist organizations to adopt some religious-like practices to address issues such as loneliness or alienation. And so the Oppy concludes that this does not turn humanism into religion, and it also fails to replicate the full existential and communal role that religion actually plays. So we then move to the next chapter, where we begin what I call the defeat chapters, where we get way more analytic and explore into more details arguments. So we start with the 5th chapter, Does Science Defeat Naturalism? We will look at an argument advanced by American analytic philosopher and theologian Alvin Plantinga, as he sets it in his 2011 book, Where the Conflict Really Lies, Science, Religion, and Naturalism. So Plantinga, as a Christian, will argue that science defeats naturalism because scientists, if they truly abide by the scientific method, will eventually have to conclude that naturalism is false or unscientific. And Oppy is going to refute this argument through this chapter in 21 sections. Section 1 and 2, background and epistemology, establish the context for Plantinga's claim and the debate over, whether science undermines naturalism. Then review the epistemological assumptions relevant to evaluating Plantinga's arguments. Then from section 3 to 7, we have critical assessment of Plantinga's 5 main points in his argument. Section 3, superficial conflict. This critically examines Plantinga's claim that conflicts between Christian theism and evolutionary psychology or higher biblical criticism are merely superficial. And section 4, merely apparent conflict, assesses that the argument that any conflict between theism and evolutionary theory or between science and claims of divine action is only apparent. Section 5, arguments for theism, discusses Plantinga's appeal to fine-tuning and protein machine arguments as science providing slight support for theism over naturalism. Section 6, support for theism. It evaluates Plantinga's claim that design discourse claims that the universe, exhibits features that are best explained by intentional design rather than by unguided natural processes, offers some support for theism, though noting that the support is difficult to quantify. And 7, deep concord. It analyzes Plantinga's claim that there is deep concord between theism and science, ultimately finding it unconvincing. And section 8, interim conclusion, concludes that none of Plantinga's arguments in sections 3 to 7 succeed in showing that science supports theism over naturalism. Then we move to section 9. So the section 9 is called EAAN, and this introduces Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism. So EAAN stands for evolutionary argument against naturalism. And there's also a modified version, a modified form called EAAN prime. And this section explains the structure of the argument. And section 10, reliability, it argues that Plantinga's assumption about the reliability of human cognitive faculties under naturalism and evolution are false. In other words, if naturalism is true according to Plantinga, then we cannot trust our cognitive faculties. And so this is the first premise in the EAAN argument. Section 11, called cases, examines the case studies Plantinga uses to justify that first premise, which claims that the probability that our cognitive faculties are reliable given naturalism and evolution is low. And section 12, analysis, critiques Plantinga's cases, arguing that they are detached from truth as behaviorist accounts of human cognition. Section 13, contra, argues that naturalists have reason to believe that evolutionary and social history explains why established science is largely true. Section 14, truth, shows that conversely, naturalists have reason to believe that most philosophical and religious, most positive philosophical and religious beliefs are false. Then the next 3 sections deal with Plantinga's next premises. Section 15, premise 2, briefly evaluates the second premise of EAAN argument. Section 16, premise 3, evaluates the third premise. Section 17, the fourth premise. And section 18 gives an upshot. It concludes the Plantinga's EAAN discussion. It argues that it fails as an argument that science defeats naturalism. And the section 19, it notes in passing that the modified argument also fails. So section 20 and 21, which aren't mentioned here in the introduction, they are about points in Plantinga that Oppy left out because they are irrelevant, and then some concluding remarks. So that's what we will see in that chapter. It's about Plantinga's argument that science supports more theism than naturalism, and therefore science defeats naturalism. We'll see that the argument fails, and science not only doesn't defeat naturalism, it actually supports it more than it does theism. Now moving on to the next chapter, does religion defeat naturalism? So this will be the longest chapter of the book and the most technical. It has, like we said, 2 parts, and Oppy calls them sections, and then each section has subsections, but I will just, call them parts. By the way, I think that this chapter will take, this chapter is going to take 2 episodes to cover, but the 8th chapter will take more episodes, because even though this one technically is longer, I think the last chapter is because of its structure, and I will explain when I get to it. So first, there is a detailed discussion of the argument of another critic of naturalism, Michael C. Rea, from his 2002 book Word Without Design: The Ontological Consequences of Naturalism. So this part is called Rea's Argument Against Naturalism. The second part of the chapter addresses a generic challenge to naturalism posed by contemporary Thomism. It's called the Thomas Challenge to Naturalism. So Thomism is the philosophical and theological system inspired by Thomas Aquinas, one of the most influential medieval thinkers. He combines Christian theology with Aristotelian philosophy and provides 5 famous arguments for the existence of God, called the 5 ways. So the first part is a criticism of Rea's argument against naturalism, and the second part is a criticism of the modern use of Thomism against naturalism. So these 2 arguments, if they are successful, would lead to the conclusion that religion defeats naturalism, but according to Oppy, they fail. So let's see each part's sections now. So the first part is about Rea's argument, and it has 16 sections, and Oppy begins by listing several controversial commitments in Rea's position, and then tackles them. First, initial quibbles. It clarifies minor preliminary issues before engaging deeper disagreement. Section 2 to 5, it addresses significant points of conflict between Rea and Oppy. Rea's claim is that there can be no substantive characterization of naturalistic commitments because naturalists can say nothing informative about the distinction between the natural and the non-natural. I have to explain briefly something here. Rea simply says that naturalism is a research program, meaning a method of inquiry. It is different from the standard use of the term research program in the philosophy of science. It is a term popularized by Imre Lakatos, but Rea uses it in a different way than Lakatos. We'll explain the difference when we get to that chapter, but simply put, naturalism is just a way to do research. It's a method among others that will depend on many things, but a way to do a method, a way to do research or a way to do inquiry doesn't mean that you are saying anything substantial about the world, how the world really is, which naturalism claims to do. A research program is just a way of inquiry, not the result of inquiry. So first, we will look at Rea's controversial claims about dispositions, experience, and evidence, methodological disposition, sources of basic belief, and conflicts between large-scale worldviews. Section 6 to 8 now counter Rea's claim, which argues that naturalism cannot substantively distinguish the natural from the non-natural by showing that current science substantively, meaningfully limits the commitment of an ideal or completed science. Like the fact that current science isn't completed science doesn't mean that we cannot make substantive distinctions between the natural and the non-natural. We will see the argument of Australian philosopher David Armstrong and Irish philosopher Philippe Petit in favor of naturalism in those sections. And section 9, called epistemological naturalism, it rejects Rea's claim that any epistemological definition of naturalism is self-defeating by clarifying the relationship between scientific methods and pre-scientific methods, arguing that no self-defeat follows. Section 10 and 11 will be a brief rebuttal of Rea's assumptions about naturalism's metaphysical and epistemological commitments, and section 12, substantive conclusions, gets to the conclusion that Rea's argument fails to show that naturalism must be merely a research program rather than a position with substantive commitments. Section 13 to 15, other minor issues, bring up a few minor critiques, like Rea's claim that his own account of naturalism is charitable, his denial that naturalists can rely on rational intuitions, and his idea that naturalism functions as both a movement and a tradition. And section 16 is just the concluding remarks that Rea provides no good reason to think that naturalists cannot be realist about material objects and minds, and no good reason to deny that there are naturalistic big pictures with substantive, metaphysical, epistemological, and methodological commitments. Then we move to the second part of the chapter about contemporary Thomism, which argues for the existence of non-natural causal entities and non-natural causal powers. So the first section, Summa Theologia, begins with Aquinas' 5 ways, the 5 arguments for God's existence, as written in Aquinas' magnum opus, the Summa Theologia. Some Thomists claim that these arguments are formally invalid but intentionally incomplete. Aquinas is supposedly assuming additional premises found elsewhere in his works, and Oppy rejects this view, arguing that we have no textual basis for thinking Aquinas meant the 5 ways to be supplemented by hidden premises found elsewhere. The second section, Summa Contra Gentiles, is also about these missing premises, hypotheses. This time, Oppy examines another important text by Aquinas, the Summa Contra Gentiles. He argues that nothing in this text provides the sort of premises that would repair or complete the 5 ways. Section 3, De Ente et Essentia, it investigates whether another text, De Ente et Essentia, contains the missing premises. And Oppy concludes that it does not. No material from this work can turn the 5 ways into valid arguments. Section 4, Summa Theologia Revisited. It explores a second Thomistic response that grants that the 5 ways are valid, but insists that they do not prove the existence of God directly. Instead, they allegedly show the existence of a first mover, a first cause, a necessary being, while other texts in Aquinas supply the additional steps needed to identify these with God. And Oppy examines the Summa Theologia again and finds no such textual support. No additional premises are supplied that would complete the proofs. And section 5, De Ente et Essentia Revisited, does the same with De Ente et Essentia. Oppy argues that although this work contains some independent arguments for the existence of God, these arguments are weak and pose no threat to naturalism. They do not provide the missing premises needed to transform the 5 ways into sound proofs. And 6 is a disclaimer about Oppy's intentions, that he's not trying to convince Thomists to abandon their big pictures. And then the chapter concludes with stating that neither Rea's argument nor contemporary Thomism give a convincing challenge to naturalism. Now moving on to the 7th chapter, Does Science Defeat Religion? Oppy argues that no, science does not defeat religion, which goes against what most new atheists claim. So why does he think that science doesn't defeat religion? Well, we'll see this through the 6 sections of the chapter. Section 1, What is Science? Opens by defining science, distinguishing different types of scientific disciplines, and explaining the institutional structures, peer review, replication practices, methodological standards that protect scientific integrity. And so these institutions also help non-specialists identify which findings count as genuinely established scientific results. Section 2 is Science a Religion, outlines fundamental differences between science and religion, showing that neither can be classified as the other. However, it also notes one important similarity. Both require specific kinds of commitments. Science demands adherence to norms grounded in the ideal of universal expert agreement, while religion requires individuals to adopt and publicly affirm certain costly commitments. Section 3 Are scientists religious? Reviews empirical studies of scientists and academics' religious beliefs. Although non-religious individuals are overrepresented in scientific and academic communities compared to the general population, the causes of this imbalance are unclear. The section critiques two common explanations that the academic environment is biased against the religious, and that religious people internalize negative stereotypes that discourage participation in science. Section 4, How is science related to religion? Examines the standard fourfold schema that purportedly captures that's how it is pronounced, purportedly captures the possible relations between science and religion. Conflict, for example, does science and religion conflict? Independence, are they independent? Dialogue, are they in dialogue? And integration, should they be integrated? Should science integrate religion, or should religion integrate science? So Oppy argues that whether conflict or independence arises between science and religion, this depends entirely on the specific claims of particular religions, and as for dialogue or integration, these can only amount to religions accepting the findings of science and not vice versa. Section 5, what do religions say about science? Well, this surveys how different religions respond to science. Some reject it, some partially accept it, some mistakenly claim full acceptance, and some generally embrace its findings. So the section focuses on the kinds of religious worldviews compatible with full acceptance of scientific knowledge, and challenges writers such as Neil deGrasse Tyson, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Victor Stenger, not sure of the pronunciation. He's the author of God, the Failed Hypotheses, How Science Shows That God Doesn't Exist. And also Lawrence Krauss, who claims such compatibility between science and religion is impossible. And section 6, what does science say about religion, closes with a brief overview of scientific fields: anthropology, sociology, economic, liberal science, psychology, and cognitive science that study religion. It also includes short remarks on psychological meta-analysis examining religious beliefs and behaviors. And finally, we get to the last chapter, chapter 8, does naturalism defeat religion? And the answer is yes, science doesn't, but naturalism does defeat religion, because the conclusion of this chapter is that best naturalistic big pictures are better than best religious big pictures in terms of theoretical values. Again, this doesn't entail that religious people or religious believers have to abandon their big pictures, or that any aggressive attitude towards them is warranted. Don't be a dick to people who never harmed you or never harmed others, whether believers or non-believers. So let's get through the sections. As I said, it has 16 sections. First section is the outline. It presents the structure of the argument for why the best naturalistic big pictures are superior to the best religious big pictures. It introduces the three following premises: that P1, premise 1, naturalistic big pictures or worldviews have fewer theoretical commitments. They are minimal in terms of theoretical commitments or ontological commitments. P2, no competing worldview has greater explanatory breadth, depth, or adequacy. We say that naturalistic big pictures are maximal in terms of explanatory breadth and depth. And 3, worldviews or big pictures that minimize commitments and maximize explanatory power are the best. Section 2 to 6, they provide the background for this argument. Section 2, the background are, the notions that you need to understand before jumping into the argument. So the second section is about the first background, big pictures. It defines again what are big pictures, and it clarifies the scope of the comparison between naturalism and religion. Third section, called background idealization, explains why the comparison concerns best versions of worldviews, not typical or popular ones. Here, we use idealization to represent each worldview in its most coherent or strongest form. Section 4, background method. It discusses the method by which, big picture should be compared using consistency, coherence, explanatory breadth and depth, explanatory power, and other philosophical standards. Section 5, background theoretical virtues. Identify the theoretical virtues relevant for evaluating big pictures, like the simplicity, the explanatory breadth and depth and adequacy, etc. So this section is where this is where the third premise that minimal commitment plus maximal explanation equals superiority is kind of defended. And finally, section 6, the background shortcut, introduces a particular shortcut for comparing big pictures. If one worldview is strictly less committed and at least equally explanatory, one can conclude that it is superior without needing to evaluate every detail. And so, starting from section 7, we get into the argument. The first section here, section 7, is a defense of the first premise, that it argues that naturalistic big pictures require only the commitments that all big pictures or best big pictures already have, already share, meaning logic, existence of the external world, causal structures, etc. And the religious big pictures, they just add further commitments, making them theoretically heavier. Section now 8 to 15, it provides a case-based defense of premise 2, it goes through the second premise to explain, that naturalism is maximal in terms of explanatory power. So section 8, overview, it maps the structure of the defense of the second premise. Section 9, general causal features, argues that naturalism explains causal regularities without invoking supernatural causes. Section 10, general design features, it gives counter-arguments against claims that the universe looks designed, and so, naturalistic big pictures they provide sufficient explanations for what we identify as design features in the universe. The 11th section is called Mind, and it argues that naturalism can explain consciousness at least as well as religious worldviews. And I said earlier that this chapter will require 3 episodes, and that because I'm gonna do one episode on the backgrounds, and then the second episode is going to cover section 7 to 11, because these are the aspects of the aspects of naturalism and non-naturalistic big pictures, let's say, that are more aligned or close to science when they talk about causal features, design features, and mind. But starting from the 12th section, we are going to be talking about things that are more removed from scientific concerns. So that's why it's going to have its own episode, and so 3 episodes: the backgrounds, section 7 to 11, and then 12 to the last section, and then the conclusion of the book. So section 12 is called Anomalies, and it addresses miracles, paranormal events, and unexplained phenomena. And so Oppy argues that naturalism handles anomalies without conceding to non-natural stuff, and so it doesn't lose any explanatory ground. Section 13 is called Experience, and it analyzes religious experiences, and it argues that they need not imply supernatural entities in order to be explained. Section 14, Artifacts, it discusses human-made religious objects or buildings, organizations, text, mostly text. It's going to focus on sacred texts, but they are claimed to be made by non-natural entities or have non-natural causal powers. And so naturalism is going to be like, no, we can explain those texts without appealing to non-natural stuff involved in those, sacred artifacts. And lastly, section 15, Communication, it examines claims of divine communication or divination. And lastly, section 16, Conclusions. it draws the conclusion that the best naturalistic big pictures are the best big pictures, hence that best naturalistic big pictures are better than the religious big pictures, hence that naturalism defeats religion. But Oppy also notes some of the ways in which this case falls short of being fully persuasive, since the premises are still controversial and each can be rejected by some sort of philosophical expertise. And with that, we have gone through the whole plan of the book. We know what each chapter is going to be about, how many sections, and what each section is about. So with that in mind, we can now begin our close reading. But before that, there is a small section in the introduction called Tips to the Readers about how to read, this book and some recommended readings about naturalism. So this book is read linearly from beginning to end, because later material depends on earlier material to be fully grasped. And that's how we're going to read it. We're going to go through, we are going to do a linear reading of the chapters. But some notions like big pictures will be better explained later. But as we said, we can now just understand them as worldviews. But he also says that despite the reliance on earlier material to understand later material, you can read the chapters as if they are independent, meaning that you can start with any chapter you like, as long as you read it very carefully. I'll also make sure that I read along to explain terms as if none of you read the earlier material. And then there are the recommendations about naturalism, but you can find all of these books in the bibliography. But I will also put the full titles in the description. You will find 4 books and 7 articles. And that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and enjoyed reading along with me. And as always, please subscribe, leave a comment, and like the video. Don't hesitate to share it. And I will see you next week to read the chapter